Welcome to All the Best, an interview series with UNL ORCA awardees, where UNL means University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and ORCA is the Outstanding Research and Creativities Award, which is UNL's top award. In Gerda Lerner's book, Why History Matters, she explains the life stories give meaning to the present and the future because we identify what is important to us. And she says, our stories show how we are interconnected in a particular time and place. As for this interview series, ORCA awardees have experiences that reach back more than a half a century, which will give us a personal view of how the best research emerged from UNL. It is my pleasure to introduce today's interviewee, Dr. Margaret Jacobs. She was awarded the ORCA in 2021. After I provide a quick summary of her life and career, Margaret will tell us about her time at UNL, starting with her award-winning research. Margaret was born in San Pedro, California, but grew up in Colorado. Something in her youth must have sparked an interest in history because she earned a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in that subject with a focus on the interactions between Indigenous peoples and settlers. Her bachelor's was from Stanford University in California, while her master's and doctorate were from the University of California, Davis. After teaching history at New Mexico State University, she joined the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2004 as a professor of history and director of the Women's and Gender Studies program. She's been very successful. In 2019, she was elected as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Also in 2019, she received a 3-year grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to gather materials related to the Genoa Indian Industrial School, and then partner with 2 others to make the materials available in a culturally sensitive way. In 2020, she became the director of the UNL Center for Great Plains Studies, where she's found ways to explore Great Plains culture and to develop meaningful relationships with Nebraska's current and former American Indian populations. With that, I want to welcome Margaret to the interview.
Thank you. Great to talk with you.
My first questions are, what was your impression about the UNL campus when you saw it for the first time, and what are your thoughts about the campus now?
Well, I remember very well, I was invited to come here as a visiting assistant professor in 2004, in the winter of 2006. But I came a little bit early to visit campus, I think in November of 2003. And John Wonder, who's a history professor, he was a history professor at the time, picked me up at the airport, brought me in to campus. And like the first thing I noticed was that football stadium. And so I hadn't come from places, well, obviously Stanford was into football, but I was never into football. So I wasn't used to a campus with such a prominent stadium. It was also really remarkable to me how close the campus is to the city, because I was used to campuses that were a little bit more off, a little bit more of a buffer zone. And then the very funny memory I have is that John Wonder brought me to the history department, which is in the Old Father Hall. And we got there and I said, Old Father Hall? I said, I'm a gender. This is kind of ironic. So that was funny. Those were my first impressions. But as I've been here 22 years, the things that stand out for me now are like, I love the landscaping on campus, and especially I love the new Indigenous garden that's been put in that Joy Castro of Ethnic Studies was really responsible for getting that going. And I love institutions on our campus like the Sheldon. It just is incredible. And I love the Ross Theater, and there's just been so much building going on campus, but I think it's been done in a pretty good way. And it's interesting because I've really come to love Lincoln and this area of Nebraska, and I really love the university now too. So yeah, it's fun to have been here this long and to really settle in and ground myself here.
Great. Let's jump right into your award-winning research. If you know Tell us what you think you got it for, and then a sense of how it came about that you did that work, and then why it's actually important.
Okay, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
So my first book, which I wrote based on my dissertation, it was called Engendered Encounters, and it was about relationships between white women and Pueblo Indian people in the Southwest. And I think that book helped me land my job at New Mexico State. And I was very surprised when that book came out. It won 3 awards. Like, I mean, as a young assistant professor, I was just so delighted to get a book published.
Right.
I wasn't thinking that, like, oh my gosh, better get one award. No. And so they were kind of smallish awards. They were like I can't remember, like there was a New Mexico, Arizona History Association. I got an award from them and a couple others. But then my second book, which I wrote when I was here at UNL, and it took me a long time to write that book. It was 10 years. It was called White Mother to a Dark Race. And it was a comparison of the removal and institutionalization of Indigenous children in the US and Australia. And again, I wrote that book and it was an absolute passion project for me. I was just so amazed that two countries so far apart would follow the same policy of removing Indigenous children from their families and putting them in institutions, and the havoc that it wreaked for those communities and their families. And again, I was really interested in the role that white women played in that process, and that also was incredibly eye-opening to me. So that book, again, I just wrote it because I was passionate about it, and it ended up winning the Bancroft Award, which is a really big deal in American history. And I remember the day I got a call from the Bancroft Library. It's at Columbia University, and so-and-so, calls me and say, hey, this is so-and-so from the Bancroft Library. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to ask me to be on the selection committee. I'm so excited to be asked to be on the selection committee. I mean, I'm not trying to be helpful, but that's really what happened. And the guy says, we want to tell you that your book has been awarded the Bancroft. And then he just goes on. He just says, and we invite you and your family to come to New York City for the celebration in April and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what? I said, wait, what? So that was just like so exciting. And that I think winning that award really, helped me advance in so many other ways. It helped me get grants. It helped me, it just helped me feel confident that what the kind of trajectory I was studying was really worthwhile. And it wasn't just, I used to feel like what I studied was kind of a niche and a weird niche, but then I realized that it's actually having an impact.
So you mentioned getting grants and stuff like that. I'm just going to jump right to the National Endowment for the Humanities, which sounds like an outcome. Now, my impression is getting those types of grants was hard at the time that you got one, and yet you got a fairly big one. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I actually got one early in my career too. It was for an individual work, and that was for that was actually for the project that became White Mother to a Dark Race. And again, that was also like it took a really long time to get one. I think I tried 3 times for an individual grant. And then back in 2017, 2016, really, I had this incredible opportunity. I worked for a year at Cambridge University. I had a visiting professorship there. And through that work, you would never have guessed this, but there's an incredible scholar in England who works on Indian boarding schools. And she invited me to a conference in England. And at that conference, there was this incredible group of folks who work at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and they had started a digital project about Carlisle, the most famous of the Indian boarding
Absolutely,
school.
yeah.
And so I met them, and at the time, I was already working on a book that was about truth and reconciliation and comparative truth and reconciliation. And I had traveled to Canada to go to their Truth and Reconciliation Commission ceremonies. And I was really searching for a way as a scholar to be um, engaged in truth and reconciliation. I feel like my work as a historian had done a lot on the truth side,
Right.
but I wanted to do more on the reconciliation side. But it had to be something that I could fold into my work. So I got this idea of like, oh my gosh, in Nebraska, we had a very prominent Indian boarding school in Genoa. And I thought, wow, this could be a way that I could give back to tribal communities in the state of Nebraska, and then, learning that kids from 40 different tribes attended that school. And so it became a way to think about like, how can we get these records back to the tribal communities and the families and the descendants? Um, and because it's really hard to find those records, even as a trained historian, they were really dispersed all over the place. And so I came back from that experience that year abroad, and I thought, I'm gonna try to, I mean, I have no experience doing digital work. I'm a little bit of a Luddite.
That was going to be my next question.
So I had no experience doing digital stuff. So obviously, and I've always been a kind of solitary researcher, but I realized I really need to find partners on this who have the technical expertise. And of course, I really wanted tribal partners too, people who would, tell me how we should run the project, because I had learned from my historical research how easy it is for white people to think they know what's best for Indian people. And I didn't want to fall into that trap. And I hope I haven't. So anyway, when I got back, I had a couple grad students who worked with me, and we started working on just investigating how we might do this project. And then we went to the Center for Digital Research in the Humanities, which is an incredible institution at Nebraska. And this wonderful young scholar named Liz Lorang, who had recently gotten her PhD in English, but always had focused on digital work. And she was working in the library. She really was like, we didn't know each other at all. And she said, I really want to work on this with you. And that was just incredible. She's now the dean of library. And it was just so great because she had all the technical expertise, and she shared my passion for using digital projects to engage in this kind of, I would call it social justice, repatriation of records to communities that have difficulty accessing those, but want to know more about their own history. And we applied for first a grant from the Council on Library Information Resources, CLEAR. And everybody told us, oh, you'll never get that on the first try. We were so excited. And then that led us to apply for an NEH. And we got that, and we almost were able to finish our grant before the most recent president came into office and wiped out almost all the NEH grants. But we had 2 months left when he basically said, you can't do this anymore.
Terrible.
And so luckily the university found a few resources to help us finish up what we were doing.
Okay.
So that project, it's at a really good point. We've done all that we intended to do. We got all the records, we got them all up online. But another cool thing is Liz and I were co-directors for many years, and we turned it over to 2 new co-directors, Susanna Haliga, who's a Lakota professor at UNL, and Angel Hinza, who's a Winnebago professor here at UNL. They'll be the new co-directors. They're both in that stage of their careers where they're trying to get tenure. But so they are going to take the project wherever they want to from here on out. They're very interested in oral histories. with communities and descendants and families. And Susanna has already started that, and we already have a few of them up online. But yeah, it'll be really exciting to see where they take it. And that was our intent all along, is that this belongs in the hands of Indigenous people and scholars. And so I feel really good about that.
How many of these industrial homeschools or Indian schools were there?
Well, you'd think we would know.
Oh, really? We don't know.
Well, it's so interesting because I hope that some of my scholarship might have contributed to a movement to actually investigate the schools. And I worked closely with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and they during the Biden administration, they achieved an apology from Biden for the schools. And they the head of the Department of Interior was Deb Holland, who herself is from Laguna Pueblo, and she initiated an investigation and inquiry into the schools. Well, based on their very cautious research, which they did not conduct with historians, I can't remember how many schools they had on their list, but a few hundred. But the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition is doing all of their own research with a lot of historians, and they're at over 365, so and it's ironic again, it's like this should be basic factual information, the fact that these new boarding schools are turning up all the time. And granted, some of them are federally run, some of them are run by churches, and so it's been complicated.
So way more than one per state.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And we had Genoa as the big federal school.
Okay.
We had a couple church-related schools, but they've had a huge impact on Native communities. And I do feel like my White Mother to a Dark Race book contributed to a lot of other scholarship that built, most of it by Native scholars. And I think it just really contributed to a greater awareness about the damaging effect of those schools. Albeit for some Native people, they had some positive effects, but in the kind of big balance sheet, overall balance sheet, they were very negative. They destroyed children's ability to speak languages. They destroyed children's relationships with their families. They were very harsh, lots of harsh discipline of children, abuse of children. And when you think about taking children away from their families and communities at, like, let's say age 6, and not allowing them to return home until they're over 18, they miss out on learning from their own communities all the cultural protocols and practices and how to raise children. They don't see it, they don't learn. And so it led to this kind of long-term legacy of so much, so much trauma to Native communities. So,
do you have any sense what percentage of children were sent to these boarding schools?
Oh, wow. Again, that's really, you would think it'd be easy to figure that out, but it hasn't been. So for one year, I tried to figure that out for the year of 1900. And in that year, I found, based on the government records, I found that about 78% of children had been taken to boarding schools. And some of them were, quote, on the reservation. For example, the Hopi people, they had one boarding school on the reservation. And that sounds like, oh, it's not too bad. It's like, but they still didn't allow them to see their families. And many of the reservations are enormous. And so the boarding school, like in the case of the Hopi, was far away from their settlements and things. And so it was still really difficult for children to see their families, and they still were subjected to that discipline all the time, and that punitive
No, it's absolutely terrible.
regime. Yeah.
So tell us about one or two of your graduate students of visiting professors and what were their projects and what happened in their career.
So I've had a lot of graduate students, and again, I should have prepared and so I could tell you exactly how many. But it's so great that it's just been such a rewarding thing to work with graduate students and to just follow their lives and careers. And many have gone into academia, many have gone into other things.
Mhm.
And I'm going to think about, I thought about this in advance, and there's two grad students who really stand out for me. And one is Susanna Haliga.
Oh,
She came to work with me here for her master's and then stayed on for her PhD. And she's from Rosebud, Lakota, or Sikanji, Lakota. And I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Practiced it so many times and I haven't thought it. But Susanna is an extraordinary individual. She came here, after a long career as a teacher. She had grown up as a fluent speaker of Lakota from her grandmother, and she developed a curriculum of the language and taught it. And she's just an extraordinary individual, and so it's just such an honor to work with her. And I think she started to dream of getting a history PhD, and she's like me, very nerdy. Gets so excited when she walks into an archive.
Yeah.
That smell, just like just is passionate about history, and so it was such a privilege to work with her. And then she was teaching online part-time for UNO as she was finishing up her degree, and they were like, Susanna, my gosh, you're so amazing. We really want to see if there's a way we can hire you long term. And she ended up getting a tenure track job at UNO, teaching both history and Native studies. And that's just been so gratifying. And she's an assistant professor, and she's going up for tenure soon. And so she's one of my standouts. Another is Balir Ben Taleb. Balir's came here on a Fulbright from Tunisia, and he worked on his master's. And he was really interested and passionate about Indigenous history. And he worked with somebody else on his master's, and they ended up taking another job somewhere else. And he came to me and said, would you take me on as your PhD student? And at the time, I had a lot of PhD students. And I thought, I just don't know if I can take on another student. So I subjected him to what I call like slaying the dragon.
How much do you really want this?
I said, well, this is just this. And, like, I asked him to take a seminar with me. His master's thesis was incredibly ambitious, and he wanted to do something like, he wanted to do comparative Indigenous history. He tried that for his master's thesis, and then he wanted to continue it for his PhD. I'm like, so I just had this list of things he had to do, and he did every one of them to absolute perfection. And he was just another delightful person to work with. He ended up doing a dissertation about the experience of the Western Shoshone people with the Indian Claims Commission, which was a means by which Native people could bring claims against the U.S. government for land loss, and that the government made monetary compensation for them. And it was in the 1950s. It's a very interesting thing, and people debate about it all the time. I think a lot of the debate is because people would have preferred to get back land rather
Absolutely.
and the Lakota have been engaged in a lot of
I think They won't accept the money.
Right. And that's in the Western Shoshone.
Oh,
So there were some in the tribe who wanted to accept the money and
mm,
some who wanted they said that we never even signed a treaty to lose this land and we should get it back. And
mm.
it happened to be land that was uh, in the Nevada nuclear test site and military land.
Mm,
So Belir did this. He started out with super ambitious, and I said, "Why don't you focus on one tribe?" And it just so impressed me because instead of just going to the archives, he cold called Western Shoshone people
wow.
in rural Nevada, and he went out there on his winter break
Oh, wow.
with his new bride, who was from Morocco,
Mm,
and they traveled around and they met people and stayed with them and he interviewed people and he just has so much like passion and courage. I mean, it's to do that, like it
mm,
was just amazing. And he produced an amazing dissertation and he's at the stage too where he's an assistant professor and he's working toward tenure and
mm,
he's
mm.
working toward turning his dissertation into a book.
Okay.
As is Susanna. Susanna did an interesting dissertation on Susan LaFleche.
Oh, yeah.
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 And she has a real passion for Native women's history.
Mm,
Anyway, they were just amazing grad students, and I love keeping in touch with them and seeing
mhm.
all the great things they do.
Sounds really good. Um, so how does history define impact, right? So this is about being an academician, and every year we have an annual evaluation. In the sciences, it's really clear how you define impact, but not outside the sciences, it's a little different. Um, and it also is at odds with actually what we value sometimes.
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts on that? How do historians define impact and measure impact?
I can't always speak for other historians, but like I think for me, what I think is that are other historians reading your work? Are they engaging in conversations with you? Are they citing it in their own work? Are they, when you go to a conference, are they talking about the work? Is it influencing how people see the field?
Mhm.
So I think that's one thing. And I think for some historians it might stop there, but
Mm,
for me it doesn't.
mm,
Because for me, it's really important that we're also having an impact on public discourse about history.
mm.
Um, and more as I grow older, I just feel like our discourse, our historical discourse in this country is so impoverished. And even before the recent administration,
Mhm.
it's been impoverished, and especially when it comes to American Indian history.
Mm,
And so for me, one way to measure impact is this scholarship making its way out into the public discourse.
mhm.
Um, and I think and is it being incorporated into new historical interpretation? So if you go to a museum,
Mm,
do you see it
mm,
incorporated there, or is it this? I mean, in my field, especially, I was trained in the history of the American West. There's such a strong, pervasive narrative about the history of the American West, and it's really been hard to dislodge that. Um, so for me, one gauge of impact is if I go to the Denver Historical Museum, am I going to see a new interpretation of
mm,
how we talk about the West?
mhm.
Is the Ken Burns documentary on the West, is it going to have anything about this? So that's how I think about it.
Mm. So just let me probe that just a little bit. So in the sciences, it is possible to publish one paper a year. And then
Mm.
citations come a year later and 2 years and 3 years. But the timeline on history is a little bit longer. So it's a little bit harder. And you're also trying to reach out into the culture, and the sciences aren't. So that's really interesting observation.
Yeah, and we do write articles, but generally, we get tenure and we get promoted if we write a book. And and you generally cannot get tenured or promoted without a book.
Oh,
And so even if you wrote 7 articles,
is that right?
and generally you have to write articles and so yeah, and that's it just takes so much time and to write a book. I mean, my second book took me 10 years.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a book right now that I've been working on for 10 years too.
Okay.
And it won't get done for another probably 5 years. So
All right. So you've mentioned 2 of your books. Are there any other creative works that you remember most? And
yeah, I've written 4 books.
okay.
So more recent ones, one's called A Generation Removed. And it's kind of the sequel to A White Mother to a Dark Race. It's about how the US government, the Australian government, and the Canadian, I threw the Canadians in there, all continue to carry out Indigenous child removal in the post-World War II era. But they switched their tactics. And instead of focusing on institutionalization of children, they focused on placing them up for adoption in non-Indigenous families. And that just shocked me that
It is.
so many, and it was happening in New Zealand too, and I know it's been happening in places other than British former settler colonies, but I'm really limited by my language skills. So that book, I can't remember what year it came out in, but that was like another absolute passion project for me. I've One of the critiques I got on my White Mother book was that it was a comparative history, not a transnational history. Well, what does that mean? It means that I'm comparing 2 things, and I kept getting questions. Well, was there any contact communication between them?
Right.
And generally I didn't find any. And I thought that was interesting. But A Generation Removed allowed me to move into true transnational history. And what I mean by that is that I did find communication, both from the point of view of government officials who were swapping ideas about how to deal with their Indigenous problem.
Wow.
And but also from activists. And that book was so exciting to find growing activism, and that I just cannot forget the days I was in archives in Princeton, and I was finding that these Australian activists were making contact with these American activists that I was studying.
Wow.
I still get goosebumps.
Wow.
It was just really exciting to see that.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, and this Australian activist took a tour up in Canada. And so that was really great. And then my 4th book, which came out just a few years ago, is called After 100 Winters: In Search of Reconciliation on America's Stolen Lands. And that book was a big departure for me because it brought me into contemporary times. And it started out being a book about comparative truth and reconciliation in the US, Canada, and Australia, hoping to do New Zealand too, but that didn't happen. But it became much more about grassroots truth and reconciliation in all of those 3 places. And it just, again, it was when I started that book, I reached out to a local journalist named Kevin Aberesk, who's also Rosebud Lakota. And he and I started a project where we did kind of what you're doing, Mark. We started a podcast.
Okay.
And we called it Reconciliation Rising. And what we did was we searched out Native and non-Native people who were working together to try to confront what had happened in history and then kind of reconcile and overcome some of it and promote healing. And so that project I used a lot of it as the basis for After 100 Winters. And it was Yeah, it was just really exciting to me, the direction it took and the organic way it grew. And
Mhm.
all my books have actually been like that,
Mhm.
where I start out with one idea and they gradually shift. And
Mhm.
now I expect it when I write. It's like I used to think it was a crisis. And I used to like, the first couple of books, it was like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, that's part of the creative process.
Mhm. Got a block.
Yeah.
And creative works that you thought were good, but were not among your best received.
Well, that's kind of true of a generation removed.
Mm.
Um, Although it's funny because I don't know if you're familiar with the Indian Child Welfare Act. Um,
Mm.
Probably your
No.
listeners are not familiar with it.
Okay.
But it was a law passed in 1978 that tried to stop this removal of Indigenous children from their families and placing them in non-Indigenous families. And it created all these guardrails so that you couldn't just remove children without like good cause, meaning neglect or abuse.
Mm.
You couldn't remove them just because their families were poor or their grandmother was raising them and things
Mm.
like that. And um, it's the bane. This law is a lot of adoption. Well, some adoption agencies really hated it.
Mm.
Um, because, well, for lots of reasons, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for people to adopt what they used to call blue ribbon babies,
No.
meaning white, blue-eyed, blonde babies. For, I know it's shocking, but they really actually said that.
Yeah.
So adoption agencies were always trying to find a quote supply of children. I mean, they really use those terms. And so the Indian Child Welfare Act really put the brakes on that, and it made it so much more difficult to adopt Native children. And it has become now like what again? Now it's called the gold standard. The kinds of guardrails they put in place
Yeah.
have become the gold standard for
For all of
all
it.
adoption.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
but there's still people who really hate it. And
Good.
so anyway, this became the book A Generation Removed was about the backstory of that act. I didn't set out to write a book about the history of a piece of legislation, but it's part of the book. And that's what's so interesting is law school professors love that book
Oh.
and they assign it. And I've been asked to like I was asked to be an expert witness on a case with the Department of Justice back in the Obama years.
Mm.
Um, I I'm always asked to like, there's been a couple Supreme Court cases that have come up, and I've been asked to, comment on them. And there was just a case, and I can't remember the exact year, but it was a couple years ago, and it was called the Brackeen case. And the Supreme Court, so many Native people were so worried they were going to overturn the Indian Child Welfare Act. Um, and they didn't. And the person who was the kind of deciding figure was Neil Gorsuch. And he wrote the majority opinion on it, and he cited my work.
Hey.
Like, it's so funny because it's like not made the impact I would hope it would make in the field of history, but it's had other impact.
Hmm.
So
since it was a federal legislation, what was the rationale given? What problem were they trying to solve?
the Indian Child Welfare Act,
Yeah.
the problem that like by the late 60s, early 70s, it depended on the tribe, but 25 to 35% of all Native children had been separated from their families.
Uh,
And it actually bubbled up from the grassroots.
oh.
Native people working with the American Association Indian Affairs, this national advocacy organization, asked them to go to Congress and help them find sponsors of a bill that would help rectify the situation, because it was like a continuation of the boarding school policy, just wreaking havoc on Native communities.
So, but was that adoption policy of decades earlier, was that a federal legislation?
That's a great question. If you know about the history of adoption, it's generally a state.
Oh,
It's the purview of states, and you're not supposed to have children taken across state lines for the purposes of abortion and things like that.
really?
But what was so weird is the federal government started a federal program to encourage the adoption of Native children, and even did allow it across state lines, and encouraged it because the rationale was, our boarding school policies, we thought that would end Native communities. We thought we wouldn't have the so-called Native or Indian problem anymore, that, Native children would assimilate. They would never go back to the reservations would disappear. Well, that didn't happen with the boarding schools. And Native people did not become wealthy as a result of these really stringent, harsh assimilation policies. And so the government continued to believe that Native people were a problem that needed to be solved. And so they came up with this idea to start this adoption program. It went for 10 years, from 1958 to 1968. In 1968, the Child Welfare League of America took it over and ran it for another 10 years until the Indian Child Welfare Act. So, yeah, and not, I would say only about 1,000 children got caught up in that federal program or that national program, but there was so much pressure on states to also have their own programs, and the director of the national program would visit states, and he would, tell South Dakota, let's work to get your Native children into Native families. So
unbelievable. How about curatorial activities, society leadership?
let me think about that. I haven't really, I work here with the folks at the museum, the Great Plains Art Museum, and I've learned, I didn't know a thing about museums until I took this job at the Center for Great Plains Studies. And we have just two incredible staff people here who run our museum, just two. And I've learned so much from them, and
I've come to a lot of shows there.
Yeah, and they're just incredible. So I kind of play a really peripheral role with the curatorial activities here, although I was just invited by the Sheldon to interpret a work for their new Hyphen American show, which was really fun. And society leaderships, I have done a lot of service in various societies. I've never been like the leader of a society. So
no, that's good. So we talked about some of your research. Were there more? And then how did that change over time?
Well, yeah, I think there's been 4 books. There's the Genoa Indian School project. There's a Reconciliation Rising project with Kevin. And then most recently, through the Center for Great Plains Studies, we got a $1.58 million grant from the Mellon Foundation, which is a big humanities
big one.
Yeah, for a humanities scholar.
Dude.
And that has been incredibly gratifying. Is a partnership we established with the Oto-Missouri tribe. And that tribe used to live here in Lincoln. Before it was Lincoln, they lived in southeast Nebraska. This was their land. They ceded this land by treaty in the 1830s and the 1850s. They were removed from this land in the early 1880s. And that just happened organically. I met somebody from the tribe through my work with Reconciliation Rising with Kevin, and it just snowballed. And it's been incredible to work with them. And they asked the mayor of Lincoln to establish an Oto-Missouri Day, and we've been celebrating that for 4 years now. And hope to do it in perpetuity.
Mhm.
We do it every September, they signed a treaty in September
Oh.
21st, and they picked that day as
Oh.
a significant day. And we've had everywhere. One year we just had 25 tribal members come, and last year we had about 150 come. And that's just been great. We also have been doing a lot of art things with them. We did an art show, and we're working on a mural project for the city, and we have plans to do art trail. We also, it's a partnership that also involves the city. And the city has set aside some land in a new park for the Ottomazura to build their own ceremonial ground. So that's been really, really fun. And we're trying to change some of the interpretation around Southeast Nebraska so that people actually learn that the Ottomazura were here, because, even though I'm a historian of Indigenous peoples, I didn't know this was their homeland. It took me 20 years to learn it, or, 18, or some ungodly amount of time. And so yeah, that's been incredibly rewarding. And for change over time, I guess with my research, like I told you, I mean, it used to be very solitary. Now I'm very team oriented, and we call it the Walking the Footsteps of Our Ancestors project with the Ottomazura. We have a leadership team of about 8 people. And then we have over 50 people who have like official roles on the project. And then we have another group of people around that who just volunteer. So like from this little solitary researcher to this big group project. And I probably would never have foreseen that. Another change I think for me has been just much more interest in making history very public and reaching a very large public popular audience. My books have really changed. Like the last book, After 100 Winters, I very much wrote it for a popular audience. I'm not sure the publishers I sent it to all thought that, but and I just, again, that's like a big commitment of mine to make sure that we're reaching a larger audience than just other historians. And then I think the final way my work has changed is that I've become much more interested in the reconciliation part of my work, because I think the more I learned about what happened to Indigenous peoples, the more I became interested in trying to repair that, and maybe repair it partly through writing, that's a skill I have, partly repair it through research, but also do something really concrete, like establish this relationship with an actual tribe that used to be here. And I know you've done that work too, and coming perhaps from a totally different angle, but it's been really great to see what you've been doing in the tribal community.
So the literature on Indigenous science also reaches to Canada and Australia. So your talk here resonates with me. Let me ask you a controversial question, maybe. The name Nebraska, wasn't that an Oto word?
Yes. And they pronounce it Nebraska.
Okay.
And I probably botched that again. Did my best. Ni is their word for water.
Okay.
And Blaska is flat.
Okay.
And yeah, that is an Oto word.
So yeah, what techniques? How do you go about doing this work? The research.
Well, it used to be very archival, and
what does that mean, really?
Yeah, exactly. That can be a really challenging thing, is to find out the kinds of historical questions you ask. Where are you going to find actual historical evidence to help you figure that question out? And so there is like a database that shows you what archives have, but when I was starting out, that was really primitive and it's really difficult. Now I'm able to search these databases and find that, the National Archives of Australia has, materials about child removal. I can find that now. So, and then once you find out that an archive has material related to your topic, it's a matter of contacting them and finding out. Usually they have an inventory of everything in a particular collection, and so you get those inventories and you go through them. Sometimes they're hundreds of pages long.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have no idea if anything is actually relevant. Um, and then you have to scramble to find some money to get to an archive. And so, like, the NEH, the first one I ever got, I was able to go to Australia with that NEH. And and then once you're in the archives, it's such a ritual, really. Like, all these things are stored way back in their vaults, and then they bring you this cart full of these little boxes full of materials, and then it's just going slowly through them. And I remember the days when I was starting out my dissertation research. We didn't have cameras on our phones.
Oh, yeah.
We couldn't take pictures of the documents. You could order copies from the archives, but sometimes, you really wanted thousands of pages. And so my early research was really basically taking like hand notes or type notes sometimes, and then like being very selective about what I copied and what I did not copy. And then my later research was much more about like that phone, like
Yeah,
1,000.
yeah.
And in some ways, the earlier was better
It was
because you get
succinct.
1,000 pages and then you have to go process it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that's one way we historians do our research is, working with written sources. There's interviews. I've done more and more interviews. So for example, Susanna, would do interviews with living Omaha people today about, their families' memories of Susan LaFleche and things like that. And for the Truth and Reconciliation, I did interviews, so many interviews with both like really, like people who were at the top. Like I interviewed Murray Sinclair, who was one of the Truth and Reconciliation commissioners in Canada. Oh my God, be like meeting, like Bishop Tutu or something, and he had that kind of gravitas. He's since passed, and what an amazing human being. And I was able to meet a man named Nick Dodson in Australia who ran their Stolen Generations inquiry. Also, he's an Indigenous, as is Marie Sinclair, and also both of them were attorneys. And I can't even believe these people agreed to talk to me, but it was just so exciting to talk to them. But then I find out that there's this man in Winnipeg, this white man who started this Reconciliation Circles organization. And so I was up in Winnipeg and I called him up and I interviewed him. It's like, so I wanted to run the gamut from the people at the very top of this field who are working to try to repair these atrocities that had happened to the people who are just like really passionate in their own communities and trying to work to repair these things. And so, for example, one of the first, actually the very first interview that Kevin Aberesk and I did was with Roger Welsh, who people may know. He used to be a folklore professor, English professor at UNL. And he had 60 acres of land in Dannebrog, Nebraska, that he ended up gifting back to the Pawnee Nation. And so he was our first interview. And that's, example of grassroots reconciliation. And Kevin and I just really wanted those stories to be told because we tend to hear such negative stories. And we also wanted to encourage other people to follow Roger's example and to do things to heal these relationships, So.
And don't the Pawnee make an annual trek to the lands of?
I'm sure it's probably more than annual.
Yeah, more than annual.
They were able to bury some of their ancestors that they got back from the Nebraska Historical Society on Rogers land. They also come up, before Roger died, they would come up frequently just to visit with him and his wife Linda. And Yeah, and it's been a little while since I've talked to some Pawnee folks about what they do, but they also have like a garden project up here. They work with 20 different farmers on the Pawnee Seed Preservation
Mhm,
Project,
mhm,
and they grow almost 20 different varieties of their corn that had almost become extinct.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
so exciting to see things
Yeah.
like that happening.
No, I also had a project with Pawnee Nation College
Oh, great.
specifically about the corn. Well, it was really
And you
fun.
know Deb Echo.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's great. I wanted to make her the centerpiece of a new course. So, research, academia is cooperative and competitive. Was your work ever co-opted? Anybody else working in the same space and or somebody producing similar results at the same time?
Most of us historians, we tend to kind of like we know each other and yeah, sometimes people are competitive, but I always felt like even if somebody was writing on the exact same topic as me, they would approach it really differently and we all our work could be in complementarity. I did have a really weird experience several years ago after White Mother came out. I was contacted by a PhD student in religious studies who wanted me to look at her draft of her dissertation, and she was writing about some similar issues. And I was really shocked because it did feel like she had just like, it's not that she didn't cite me, it's just that she just told the same story,
Right, right.
almost exactly the same.
Sure.
And that was tough to deal with. I don't think it was intentional on her part. And she went on to publish that,
Oh,
and it was totally different
oh,
by that
oh,
time.
oh.
So I did say something to her,
Mm, mm,
but the weird thing is what's going on with AI.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
I've actually been contacted by um, a law firm that's doing a class action lawsuit against Anthropic, and it turns out that they've like taken stuff and they don't.
mm,
It's so shocking. Like I just decided one day, I said, I want to see what will come up on AI if I put in American Indians, Truth and Reconciliation.
mm, mm,
I was so shocked because
mm,
it just summarized my book.
mm,
And I was like,
mm.
and not, I don't,
As the received truth from the world's knowledge
not
bank. Right,
citation.
right, no, I
It
don't
has to
know.
say,
Right,
this is based on the work of Margaret
right.
Jacobs. And as far as I know, I'm the only one who's written a book that's that kind of
Mm,
comprehensive. And so that was really shocking and really disturbing because
mm,
it's like
mm,
you spend so many years of your life on this, and then,
mm.
in seconds, you have something about this. Oh,
No, we are living in strange times. Was your work ever involved in a controversy? And it sounds like it could have been. And then how was it resolved?
yeah, I think the biggest way was through the Indian Child Welfare Act work.
Mm,
Um, so first working with the DOJ on a case back in the 2016, and they wanted me to be an expert witness, and they wanted me to talk about what would happen if the Indian Child Welfare Act was declared unconstitutional. I'm like, well, I'm a historian. It's kind of hard for me
that's
to
a
talk
legal
about
question.
that. But it was interesting because they kind of pushed me to look at what had happened since the law had passed. And I
Mm,
hadn't done that work.
mm,
I'd really just looked at what had happened up to that point. And that was so interesting. And that really, I just saw how controversial that act was as a result of working on that, and how some states had resisted implementing it and still resist, like South Dakota still resists
wow.
implementing it. And some states, the way that they measure um, whether it's still happening is the ratio of Native children. Um, is it higher than other children from other
Mm,
backgrounds?
mm,
And in some states, it's still higher, much higher. Minnesota, strangely. Washington State, strangely. But then other states that were initially resistant to it, like Arizona, they have no overrepresentation of Native children in their foster care system. And so it is still controversial among some folks who think it's a race-based measure. And that was the basis for the Supreme Court decision, that people who were challenging it were saying that it was a racist measure because it's based on, determining the best interests of the child based on their race. And tribes had to say, no, it's based on sovereignty. It's not. And I made that point in my book, A Generation Removed. It wasn't about Hopi people saying, no Native children should be removed. It was about, we don't want our Hopi children. We want to keep our Hopi children in our culture as much as possible. It's the way we keep our tribe alive, our culture alive. And it's not about a race. So, so that's probably where my work has been most controversial.
Okay, is there anything else before we move on to other creative career activities? What didn't we cover?
I just realized that I think another big piece of what I did as a scholar was I adopted a theory, and historians are not big on theories, but I adopted a theory because I found it so useful, and I learned about it from Canadians and Australians, and it's a theory about settler colonialism. And I thought it was really useful for historians of the American West to think about it, because basically it was developed by scholars in Canada and Australia, and they use the term all the time without controversy, without debate. Basically what it refers to is a colonial power coming in and trying to replace the indigenous population with the settler population by removing indigenous people from the land. And so it's all about, as one scholar put it, it was based on the logic of elimination. And it explains a lot. It explains why did the US and these other countries follow a policy of genocide? Why did they, they didn't follow a policy of genocide toward African Americans because they wanted their labor, right. But toward Native Americans, they wanted their land. And so they did carry out horrible atrocities, massacres, and then did it in other ways. Like you could think of boarding schools as they do in Canada. They call them a form of cultural genocide, where you're not killing people, but you're trying to still rid the country of a distinctive culture, or distinctive people. And so I thought that was such a useful theory, and I really incorporated it into my book, White Mother to a Dark Race, and then I've incorporated it into subsequent things. And that actually has also been a little bit controversial among my colleagues in history, especially in the American West. Some of them just don't like, they're allergic to theories.
Right.
They don't like these big overarching theories, no matter what they would be. But some of them just think it's too crass, or too it's not nuanced enough. And I definitely can see where they would think of that. But for me, instead of just dismissing it, I'm like, well, let's refine it. I still think it's a really useful.
No, but your point on African Americans and their required labor, or the labor that we wanted from them, very true.
Yeah.
So that's another very strong theory.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I just last week got an email from a professor in South Korea who said how much she loves my work. She's assigning my work. She's asking me to come on Zoom and speak to her class. And she talked a lot about settler colonial theory and how that she felt like it was really important, and that she's an American studies professor, and she felt like I was one of the first historians to use that theory, and that she thought it was really useful. So it's interesting, but like I said, it's controversial.
Yeah. Yep. Korea is an interesting country too.
Yeah.
But let's move on to other career activities. What societies were you a member of? What conferences did you attend regularly or do? And is there a meeting that was especially memorable?
Yeah, so I would occasionally go to the enormous conference, the American Historical Association.
Okay.
That brings together all historians in the United States, no matter what they study.
Okay.
There's a conference called the Berkshire Conference on Women Historians I would go to it was only held every 3 years, and that was an exciting conference because it was people who specialized in women's and gender history,
Mm.
and it was really fun. And I used to go to, well, one I went to almost every year was the Western History Association. And that has been such an interesting intellectual home. When I started going to that conference, there was so much controversy going on there. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a scholar named Patty Limerick, Patricia Limerick.
No.
She wrote a book that I read in grad school
Mm.
called Legacy of Conquest, and it was meant to be a popular book about the history of the American West. And in it, she challenged all these like cherished dominant narratives we have about the West, the winning of the West and stuff. And so when I started going to that association conference, there were people who were going to it who clung to those old narratives. And then there were the new, they called themselves the new Western historians. And there were lots of clashes and things like that. And the Western History Association wasn't a very friendly place for Indigenous scholars when I started. It wasn't a very friendly place for scholars who were doing like Latino history or Asian American history, and now it's really changed. Well, not all those people might that in general.
They stopped going. Those people stopped going.
You see more folks from those communities and doing that scholarship in their own communities, going to the WHA. I still hear things from some of my Indigenous colleagues about things that are going on that they don't like. But anyway, I remember my very first Western History Association conference. It was in 1995. I was in grad school. And it was so exciting. I was in grad school at Davis, California, but by that time I'd moved back to Colorado where I grew up. And the conference was in Denver. It was my first academic conference. And it was, as I mentioned, it was like that. It was a juicy time when there was a lot of controversy going on. And I remember going, and one of my best friends from grad school was there. She was a member of the Tolowa tribe. And so she introduced me to all these native scholars that she knew who were there, who are now like famous. Like Phil Deloria, who is a Harvard historian right now, and Ned Blackhawk, who won the National Book Award for his book a year or two ago. And Ned was still in grad school. Phil had just graduated, and it was just so fun hanging out with them. And this small group of native scholars, and and then just seeing people like Patty Limerick. I was like, oh my God, it's Patty Limerick. Very nerdy thing to do, but like just when you're in grad school in history and you just read so much and you read all these people, and I mean I just admired them so much for what they've done, and it was like to meet them in person, it was like going to the Oscars or something, seeing all these, for me, famous people and just being like a little fangirl.
No, that sounds really exciting. What did you take a sabbatical? And then what did you do during your sabbatical? And did it ever change your direction?
I took a sabbatical every chance I got. Not because I don't like teaching. I've always loved teaching. But just because I had these passion projects, and a lot of them involved going to far-flung archives in Australia, and so.
Well, how long were you in Australia?
Well, I don't know if you strung it all together, how many years that would be, but when I got a Fulbright to go there, and an NEH, and that allowed me to go there for 6 months. And I was in the capital, Canberra, where I had access to a lot of archives and scholars and things like that. And then I went back a lot and would spend like 6 weeks here and there, different places to go to different archives and also just, have fun and explore. And I had small children and we would all go together and we'd have a great time and stuff. So yeah, I was able to probably my first sabbatical that I took way back when I was at New Mexico State was to Australia.
Oh,
Um, and then I've had some where I kind of stick around here mainly, but to write, but then I would go on short research trips. Like I did a lot of research in the Princeton libraries and things in Canada and all that. Um, but I, but they all really changed and really like they just opened up so many new possibilities. That Australia trip, especially because I really felt like I could immerse myself in not just the archives, but I had a visiting research fellowship with the Center for Cross-Cultural Research at Australian National University. And there were so many amazing scholars there from all over Australia and they have a tradition of tea time twice a day. 10:30
twice a day.
10:30 and like 4 and like so at tea time you just gather with folks and have these informal conversations and I'd have like I'd have a question like what's this about or and then like it was just amazing, so intellectually stimulating that time. And yeah, so I came back from that and I just had all this material that I knew I wanted to write this book that was comparative. And then I had also just been really influenced by all these scholars who were working in the field of settler colonial studies. And then I had a fellowship from the Carnegie Corporation of New York that was a 2-year fellowship, which is absolutely unheard of in history. And another thing that's unheard of is I somehow managed to convince the university that they should give me 2 years
Oh,
off
wow.
teaching.
Wow.
Yeah. But thanks to UNL, I really feel like that was absolutely transformative because not only did it allow me to travel to archives in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, but it also allowed me to launch that project with Kevin and which has also led to several film projects. So it just allowed me to kind of reinvent myself and reinvent my scholarship and yeah, it's like so I'm sure there's people who think sabbaticals are, a waste of money and why aren't these people in the classroom? But it really had a huge impact on me and that also translates into the classroom as well. I think it makes you a better teacher when you have that immersion in your field in that way.
No, they're good in general. Let's see. What service contributions do you remember the most in your department or the university or the community or nationally?
Yeah, so I loved being director of women's and gender studies,
There you go.
and I love being director of the Center for Great Plains Studies. Even though those things are very different, what unites them is interdisciplinarity. And one, for me, it's very exciting to meet people across the university, not just in history or not just in my small orbit. And so much great. I just get so much out of that kind of cross-pollination. And so I loved meeting, like when I was director of women's and gender studies, we were working on the advanced grant with the NSF.
Right.
And so we were involved in that. And so I got to meet all these great scientists, women scientists from around the university and hear about their unique challenges. It was eye-opening for me. And the problems with the so-called pipelines,
Right.
and how so many women scientists start out, just as passionate, just as interested as men, but there's all these roadblocks along the way that get in their way. And that was just really eye-opening and great. And we had a common, goal with women's and gender studies where we really wanted to, bring scholarship, whether it was history, like my field, or whether it was, psychology or anthropology or chemistry.
Yeah. Yeah.
To just because for me, I guess when I was an undergrad, one of the most influential professors I had was a historian, a woman and gender named Estelle Friedman, and her class just absolutely changed me and made me want to become a historian. I hadn't wanted
Oh,
to be a historian before
okay.
that.
All right.
And so I just wanted to bring that experience to students here. Again, I'm sure there's people who think, oh, that field, that's all about indoctrinating students. It's not really. It's about like just giving us new perspectives, and um, it's about understanding our world. Because gender is a huge aspect of our world, but it's so often just taken for granted. So I've always loved things as a scholar where we take things that we think we know, and we take things that we think are all settled and definitive, and we really say, hey, it's actually
Influx.
it's in flux, it's more complicated than you think. And so I love that, and I love working here. um just again, it's really fun meeting people from all over and all four campuses of the University of Nebraska, because we involve everybody. And I love especially meeting all the folks on East Campus, in School of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and that's just been really great. I also had a gig on the search committee for a new dean of College of Arts and Sciences, many years ago, and that was so interesting. Just gave me a little bit of insight into like behind the scenes things.
How do you choose a leader?
Yeah. Yeah, what makes a good leader?
What makes a good leader?
And
How do you know?
yeah, exactly. So yeah, those are probably my most memorable services at the university. And
Okay, what courses did you teach more often than others, and what are your thoughts about those courses?
so following in the footsteps of my mentor at Stanford, I developed a class on women's and gender history in the United States. And I got to teach that every year, and I loved that. I had I had so many, I had students who I think for them it was what it had been for me too. It was something that got them excited about history. I mean, I think I converted a couple people to history majors. I think it just gave them insight into the world in a different way. That class makes you think a lot about what matters historically and how does change occur. Because when you study women's and gender history, it's generally not about studying like the luminaries. It's not like, let's study Abigail Adams and Susan B. Anthony. It's about like, what were women's lives like? What were gender roles like? How did they change over time? What caused that change? And how are changing gender roles having impact on other things in society? And so it's like really intriguing to me to think about. And then at the graduate level, there were two classes I got to teach that I really loved. And one was a comparative history class called Women, Gender, and Empire. And I always told students you don't have to have any background in women or gender, or like, because we're going to read books about Nigeria, we're going to read books about Australia, we're going to read books about Indochina, like you don't have to have any background in those because we're all approaching it as a theme. And that class was really fun. I mean, I certainly didn't have background in Indochina and Nigeria, but we could talk about some of the similar issues that came up. And I had students who would come to that class from English and modern languages and anthro, and in addition to history. And it was just a super stimulating class.
What was the enrollment?
Oh, our grad seminars, I think, are up to 12 to 15.
Okay.
So it was small.
You could have great discussions.
We had great discussions. My undergraduate women's and gender history class was about 60.
Oh.
Yeah. And then the other grad class I loved to teach was kind of the historical methodology class. Ooh, so fun. Again, real small, like, 12 people. I had not known how much I would love to teach that class, but just, I think it's really important for historians to be good writers. I think in the training historians receive, we don't always focus on that. So I focused a lot on that, and we had such good, fun discussions, and we workshopped each other's work. And then just teaching burgeoning scholars, what are techniques to, like what we talked about, how do you approach the archives? How do you find material to answer your questions and things like that. So that was really fun.
No, that sounds fun. Okay, and then let's see. I believe we have not talked about New Mexico State, and I'm not sure why that didn't come up yet, but tell us about that little portion of your life.
Yeah, I had just finished grad school. I had one child.
Oh.
And my husband and I had decided to move. We were living in Northern California near UC Davis, and we decided to move to a place we really, really wanted to live, which was Colorado. And we decided to move back there, and we were so naive because we thought, like, well, if we just get like a part-time job at one of the colleges here in Colorado, that it'll eventually move into a full-time position. No, that's not how things work. But we did that, and it was a great experience to be there. But during that time, we also made a pact that we would both be applying for full-time tenure track jobs, and whoever got the job that we liked, we would go. And so during that time in Colorado, I got the job in New Mexico. And we moved there, and by that time I'd had a second child.
Oh.
So we moved there with a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And it's an amazing place. Las Cruces, New Mexico. It's high desert. It's about 3,000, 4,000 feet. Beautiful desert. I'd never lived in a place like that, and I thought I wouldn't like it. I thought I'd be seeing rattlesnakes and scorpions all the time, but I absolutely loved it. And it was a small department. We had a really congenial, wonderful collegiality, and I taught women's and gender history there, and I taught I actually taught some Indigenous history there, which I'm kind of reluctant to do as a non-Indigenous person, but I would always tell my students, there's kind of a history to why you have a non-Indigenous professor teaching you this.
Right.
And then, I'd go into a lot of detail on that. So anyway, that was really fun. And we were there 6 years, and then Nebraska came calling and asked me to come here for that visiting professorship. And while I was here, they had a full-time position open up, which I applied for. And my husband was an English professor, and he was also able to make that leap. So,
wow, that sounds great. All right, let's do the part about the youth, followed by undergraduate and graduate training and your personal life. So where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up mostly in Colorado. We moved there when I was 6. Before that time, my family had a lot of people. My dad had been in the military, and shortly after I was born, we moved to Hawaii. And this was in the 60s, and we lived on the north shore of Oahu, and there were not a lot of haoles, as the locals called white folks. And so we lived there until I was 5. My father died there. And my mom moved my brothers and I back to the mainland, and she'd grown up in Kansas City, and she didn't want to live forever in Kansas City. So she moved us to Colorado where we had a few relatives um, and once we moved to Colorado, I mean, I was so young when my dad died. I didn't really have a sense that it's normal to have a dad. So I didn't grow up feeling like I was deprived ever. And then my grandmother lived with us. She moved in with us to help my mom, and that was really great to have my grandma. And my brothers and I had a lot of friction. But I loved the outdoors. I loved being in Colorado. I loved playing outdoors. It was really
Where were you in Colorado?
West of Colorado Springs, up in the mountains.
Okay.
Right, kind of at the foot of Pikes Peak.
Okay. Manitou Springs?
I went to high school in Manitou Springs.
I love Manitou Springs.
Yeah, we bus down the pass.
Oh, wow. You were way up there.
Yeah, we were in a little tiny town called Chipeta Park.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, Manitou was fun.
It is fun.
A fun little place. And yeah.
Did you ever explore any old mines?
Yeah, we would come across them a lot when we would be hiking and things, and my mother was always terrified that we'd fall down in one of them.
Reasonably so.
Yeah, but it was a great place to grow up, and I'm really grateful that my mom moved us there because I think it instilled a real love of the outdoors for me.
So what got you interested in the interactions between Indigenous peoples and the settler colonialists?
Well, it wasn't my childhood.
Okay, it was not, yeah.
I know I love Manitou Springs, but I have to say that the high school I went to was not terrific. And not terrific in the humanities, especially. I think I got a really good education in science. I had great chemistry, physics teachers. I had great math teachers, but not great history, and I didn't really like it. And so when I went to undergrad, I ended up taking a lot of history courses just for requirements, and then I just fell in love with it. And then when I went to grad school, that's what led me to want to work in this field is really it's my friend Annette Reed, who was a member of the is a member of the Tolowa Nation. And I was just so intrigued by everything she said in class. And, we'd be talking about the Great Depression, and she'd say, well, did you know that during the Great Depression, this is what happened to Native Americans, Or I think she felt like this responsibility, like she was frustrated, I think, that Native people were so absent from the major narratives of American history. And so she just was always like educating all of us about it. And I was kind of appalled that I knew so little. But I knew I wanted to do something on women and gender. And I knew I was very interested in race, but I had a pretty narrow view of it. I had worked for the Martin Luther King Papers Project when I was at Stanford, and that was an amazing experience. So I was very interested in like so-called race relations and kind of I don't know, that seems to like
60s term.
Yeah, 60s term. But I was interested in that, and then I just got so interested in the idea of thinking about what were relationships like between white women and Native women. There were so many occasions, like we're missionaries. I got really interested in that kind of those bohemians from the early 20th century who got, they were the early 20th century wannabes, and so yeah, and then learning that so many white women became teachers for the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They worked in these boarding schools. So many of them were social workers who ended up removing children. So it just, I don't know, got really interesting.
Very complicated.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, we jumped forward to your undergrad. So how did you go from rural Colorado mountains to Stanford? How did you choose Stanford, and how did you get there?
Well, I should say you don't go well. You don't go smoothly. It was very bumpy for me, but yeah, I was rural Colorado, raised by a single mom.
Yeah.
Never felt poor, but realized later that it was a struggle for my mom.
Mhm.
And so, but I was nerdy in high school. I loved learning. Um, I did well, you know. Um, and I had some counselors who were like really counseling me. You should consider like, you know, and a girl ahead of me a couple grades ended up going to Stanford.
Oh,
And I had a really an uncle I was super close to in California, and he thought, oh, you should go to Stanford.
okay.
So I put it on my list, but then I picked four other colleges that were as far away from Seattle as possible, which is crazy because I love Colorado. But I wanted something different, you
Yep.
know. So I picked like Cornell and Duke. I don't know where I got these.
Right.
I was not interested in the Ivy League at all. Well, I guess Cornell was,
Hmm.
but I wasn't really interested in like Harvard or Yale or anything
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
And I was interested in seeing different parts of the country. I even picked Purdue. I don't know
Wow,
why.
crazy.
I know, it's like it was very random. And then, you know, I had options in the state. If I'd stayed in state, I think I could have gotten a full ride, but
Mm.
I ultimately decided on Stanford because I got a really good financial aid package. I mean, I still had to take out loans and things like that, but it was like I just wanted an adventure. I wanted something different. But it was super bumpy to come there because there were a lot of really wealthy students. And I hadn't really, one, I hadn't realized that.
Mhm.
And two, I just didn't realize why that would be a problem at all. It wasn't so much that it was a problem, it's just I felt like a little bit like a fish out of water.
Mhm.
And you know, then I found my group of folks that had similar backgrounds
Mm.
um and I had amazing professors, especially in the humanities. That was like really exciting, you know, to I came there to major in earth science.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I love like I imagine what an earth scientist would do is just go hiking all the time, and that's what I love to do. So I thought, oh, I could just like make this a career.
Love minerals.
And so I just thought, oh, but then I got there and this was the days when you had to stand in line to
Yeah.
register.
Yeah.
And I was like the last registration group, and all the classes I was supposed to take in science and math were filled.
Really?
Like, for earth sciences, I was supposed to take chemistry and
Mm.
it was filled and just like,
Mm.
oh dang. So
Mm.
I guess I'll just have to take these
Mm.
stupid classes in
Mm.
history and anthropology and
Mm.
English and stuff.
Get your electives out of the way.
Exactly. And so, but it was just like eye-opening. It's like to have something, because you kind of grow up, at least I did, thinking history is just a parade of facts.
Mhm.
And it's, when I was in high school, we had to memorize the presidents.
Mm.
It's like so meaningless.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, it's great for if you like to work crossword puzzles and things like that, but
Right.
but when I got to class and it was a European history class, it was like they really like introduced like how history changes with each generation because we find new material and we ask different questions. And so I got so excited by it. And then when I took that women's history class, it's like, oh wow.
Wow. Wow. Really turned on.
Yeah.
So then how do you go from Stanford to UC Davis?
Yeah, well, I didn't go immediately to grad school. I was really tired of school after I graduated from Stanford. I was a bit disaffected too by what was going on in the world.
Mm.
I graduated in '86.
Mm.
Um, I was, and I went to work for a nonprofit, both first in the Bay Area. I worked for like peace and justice organizations, and then I went up to Oregon and took a job doing that kind of work up there. I worked for an anti-racist organization, and I was just really I didn't like politically what was going on in the world, and I wanted to like be an activist. And so I did that for 4 years, and I got tired of living on like $800 a month and living in a garage.
While trying to save the world. Not being rewarded for it.
Exactly. We didn't make the changes I
Yeah,
thought
no,
yeah, it
yeah.
was very
Incremental,
idealistic.
like incremental.
Yeah, very incremental. And so I wanted to find a way to make my way in the world where I could make a decent living, but also contribute to our knowledge about the world, you know? And so I had loved history and I decided I would go back for a PhD in history, or actually I just decided first a master's. I thought I just wanted to teach at community college. But then when I got to grad school and I started all that work, I'm like, oh my God, I love this and I want to continue this. Um, and I chose it probably not for the best reasons. I had met my husband and I met him in Oregon and he took a job down in the Bay Area. And if I had gone anywhere else, we probably wouldn't be together.
Oh, wow.
But we stayed together
Oh,
all these
wow.
years, so
Wow.
it was worth it.
Jeepers. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to find a grad school in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. Let's see. So tell us about your very first creative work and how how was it disseminated? Was it a book or was it a journal article?
It was a journal article, and it was based on a paper I had written for a history PhD class, a methodology class, and it was about a white woman in Chico, California, Annie Bidwell, who her husband owned an enormous ranch that he'd taken over from the native people there, and he he's always like lionized as offering them protection from all these other forces around them. And you know, he did, but she took it on as her mission to assimilate them and Christianize them and proselytize. And but what I discovered in the archives was that I found it so fascinating that um, the native people on the land, there were probably 5 or 6 different tribes. There were probably 50 to 75 of them. They started performing these Fourth of July ceremonies. And, you know, Annie Bidwell thinks this is a great sign that she's achieved and succeeded. And but then I read an account of these Fourth of July ceremonies. And they were fascinating because it was like this girl comes out of this bower and she's all, yeah, I don't know. I can't, I realized that they were using these Fourth of July ceremonies as a rite of passage ceremony for girls, as a puberty ceremony. And I was like so intrigued by that like, you know, you could read it as, oh, this was just, you know, assimilation thing. But when you actually looked at what Native people were, what meaning they were making of it, they were using it for their own purposes. And I was really excited about that. And that probably has become a running theme for a lot of my work, is the way that within these enormously constricted circumstances, Indigenous people are very inventive and find ways to keep their cultures alive. And that's what that article was about. And I got, again, I was like, I was just excited to get that paper done and to get an A on it. But then my mentor in graduate school said, you know, there's these friends of mine are editing a collection on women in the West, and you should submit that. And I did, and then it was like, oh my gosh, I got something published. So that was exciting.
Really fun. So in retrospect, how far did your academic work diverge from your graduate work?
You know, I feel like it just built on it. That I laid a foundation there, the interest and the passion, and then just got influences from other people and places and scholars and experiences that just deepened it and enriched it. And I think I don't think
expanded it to a wider circle of people.
Yeah, and just I think deepened the analysis too. I think my first book was called Engendered Encounters. So it was thinking about cultural counters, and then think about then I adopt a paradigm about colonialism, and I start using that word to describe more the nature of these relationships.
Mhm.
Because encounters implies that people are coming at it from
Yep. It's
equal
elastic,
places.
but it's also elastic, right? They're going
Yeah.
to dissociate and they're going to go on their separate
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah. And
But
it's
colonialism is we're taking over.
exactly. And it's about the power
Yeah.
relationships. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what I mean by my analysis deepening is that I I mean, I think I always was interested in those power relationships and analyzing them, but I adopted or I found a vocabulary, a way to talk about it that really helped me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Now we're going to go on to the last section. Tell us about your family. We've heard you're married and have two children, but how did that all play out in this story?
Well, if you talk to my kids, one gripe they will share with you is like, uh, why can't we ever just go anywhere to have a vacation?
Oh.
Why do we always have to go to a conference or an archive? But they got to go to Australia and Canada, and we got to do a lot. We spent one summer in Hawaii where I was doing some research. I was taking part in an NEH Institute, Summer Institute on Indigenous Peoples of the Pacific.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know what they're complaining about, but we always drag them along to everything, and then I bet a lot of people feel this, and maybe especially women. It's like I always felt so torn between like putting time into my work and putting time into the family. And when I remember this especially in New Mexico when I was just starting out as a professor, I always felt inadequate as a professor because I always felt like I'm not putting all my time into this, and I'm at work, but I'm worried about my son's sore throat,
Mhm.
and then when I'm home with my kids, I'm always thinking, oh, geez, I should be working on that article,
Right.
or I should be grading those papers, or so it was like this feeling of always being inadequate, and I think that it's easy in academia in general, whether you have children or not, to feel that, but
Right.
because you could always be doing more work in academia.
It is always true.
So you're not done 9 to 5. So that was always difficult. I think it really helped that Tom, my husband, was in academia as well because we had a real understanding of what that meant, and also we had flexibility. So for parenting, we could adjust our schedules. I could ask for a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. He could ask for a Tuesday, Thursday schedule, so that even though my kids complained, we were always there to be able to take them to school and pick them up at, the crazy hours that the public schools, kids get out of school at 3 or something. I was like, but I'm supposed to work till 5. So the flexibility was nice. And yeah, but a challenge.
And then your husband has a similar academic career, a parallel academic career, not in the same discipline. Was that good? Think that works out better than if you were both historians, or?
So I think it was easier for us to both get jobs than if we were in the same department. And also he got so interested in settler colonial stuff, and comparative work that I mean, when we were in Australia, he, I think, soaked all that in. He ended up writing a book. It took him a long time, but he wrote a book that's also a comparison of literature about the American West and literature about the Australian outback. So we always had a lot to talk about. We still do,
So those feed on each other, right? So the different perspectives, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And he's a really great writer, so he always would edit my stuff, always kind of gently, so we didn't get enough, argument about it or something. But yeah, he was always a really great scholar companion.
So let's see, what do you do for relaxation or entertainment?
I love being outdoors. I love walking. or hiking. I love riding my bike. I rode my bike today, February 16th.
Yeah.
78 degrees.
Oh, amazing.
I love swimming. Yeah, I love traveling. I love swimming in the ocean, so I love to travel to do that.
Ooh.
I love music too. Both to listen to, especially live music, but when I was a kid, I did a lot of music as, I played piano and violin and sang a lot. And now I play guitar, and my husband bought me a dulcimer for Christmas, and that's been fun. So I really enjoy doing that. And it's often I come home and I'm tired and I think, oh, I just don't want to do that, but maybe I'll play one song. And then I play one song and I'm like, I feel so much better. So, yeah, those are my favorite things, I think.
All right. Well, thank you for telling me your stories today.
Yeah, I hope it's not too much, Mark. I can't believe that's 2 hours, almost 2 hours. So
Nope, that's great.
yeah.